If you think money can fix every mistake, you've never stood face to face with the children you never knew you had. My name is Malcolm Rivera, CEO, real estate magnate, son of a ruthless man, and until 3 weeks ago I thought my biggest failure was a business deal that tanked in Shanghai. Turns out, that wasn't even close. Let me tell you how one ordinary Thursday evening shattered every lie I told myself, starting with the one where I thought I'd moved on from her. It started with a feeling, not a logical one, not something you can measure on a spreadsheet or present to a boardroom, just a pulse. I was supposed to be catching a flight out of Atlanta, had the jet waiting, calendar cleared. But as I drove past the Ashland district, the neighborhood where I once promised a woman the world, I saw a familiar streetlight, blinking like it had 10 years ago, and I made a choice I hadn't planned on. I told the driver to stop. He didn't argue. I got out, loosened my tie, shoved my hands into my pockets like a man trying to hold in regret, and walked along cracked pavement until I saw her, Ariel Brooks. She stood outside a worn-down diner, wearing a burgundy apron and holding a brown paper bag. Her hair was pulled back in the same defiant bun I remembered from college, her posture still straight despite life's weight, and her eyes, even from 30 feet away, I could feel them, sharp, warm, unforgiving. I froze behind a rust-stained light post like some coward afraid of his own past. That's when I saw them. 2 kids burst out the side door of the diner. A boy and a girl, both around 10 years old. They ran toward her with that careless joy only children have. They called her Mom. She dropped to her knees and hugged them tight, smiling through fatigue. I watched. Couldn't move until the boy, Noah, she called him, grabbed her hand and laughed. That's when I saw it. A crescent-shaped mark on the inside of his left wrist. My chest tightened. Then the girl. Noah tucked her hair behind her ear, revealing the same mark on hers. It couldn't be. It could not be. My own cuff was already rolled up before I realized it. My birthmark. The same shape, same place, passed down from my grandfather to my father to me, a mark no one else had. Until now, I stepped out from behind the post. "Ariel," I said, my voice low, unsure if it was real. She froze, turned, our eyes locked. The paper bag slipped in her hand. Her jaw clenched. And just like that, I was no longer Malcolm Rivera, the empire builder, the man Forbes called unshakable. I was just the boy who left and never came back. She whispered something to the twins. "Go inside." They hesitated. "Now," she said again. They obeyed. No questions, no stalling. Just gone. Then she looked at me. "What the hell are you doing here?" she asked, every syllable sharper than the last. I didn't know," I stammered. "Ariel, are they mine?" Her shoulders tensed. Her eyes didn't blink. "They are." A gust of wind blew dust across the sidewalk. A car alarm wailed faintly in the distance, but all I could hear was the rushing in my ears. "Ellie, I didn't abandon you," I said, stepping closer. "My father, he forced me out, shipped me off to London with 24 hours notice. He cut everything off, my phone, my credit, even my dorm address. I thought I could find my way back to you, but when I came back, you were gone. And for 10 years, she snapped. "You just assumed I moved on? That I'd forget?" "I looked," I said. "I searched." "You didn't search hard enough." Her voice was low now, cold. "I almost died giving birth to them, alone. I stood outside your father's estate, bloody terrified, and the guard told me I didn't exist. You were probably sipping champagne over some merger in Madrid." I had nothing to say. "I've raised them alone. I've worked double shifts. I've gone nights without eating so they could. So tell me, Malcolm, what gives you the right to show up now?" I lowered my head. "Not in shame, In truth, I don't deserve anything, I whispered. But they do. They deserve their father. She didn't answer. I continued. I'm not asking for you to forgive me. I'm not even asking you to believe me. Just let me be a part of their lives, please. Ariel studied me like I was a stranger she used to love. Then she said without blinking, "You can visit, nothing more." She turned and walked away, vanishing into that crooked little house that had raised my children in my absence. I stood there a long time after the door closed, listening to the world move on without me, wondering if it was already too late to reclaim what I never knew I had. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel rich. I felt human. You'd think building a billion-dollar real estate empire would prepare you for anything. Hostile takeovers, global recessions, fires, floods, lawsuits. But nothing prepares you for standing on the front porch of the woman you failed, knowing your own children are behind that door, and they don't even know who you are. That was me. 3 days after seeing them for the first time, holding 2 modest gift bags, palms sweating, stomach hollow, dressed down in jeans and a white button-up like I thought dressing normal would somehow make me less guilty, I knocked. The door creaked open halfway. Ariel stood in the frame, wearing a navy blue t-shirt and the kind of stare that could make a man rethink every decision he'd ever made. "You said I could visit," I said quietly. She didn't move. Then, from behind her, I heard little feet, followed by a voice. "Mom, is it the man from the diner?" It was Noah. The door opened fully. Behind Ariel, 2 sets of eyes peeked around her legs. "Hi," I said, voice shaky. "I'm Malcolm. I brought something for you." Nova looked up at her mom, sharp and silent. Noah, on the other hand, grinned wide and walked right up to me. "What's in the bag?" he asked, already reaching. I laughed. Couldn't help it. His curiosity was magnetic. "Books," I said, "and Legos." He beamed. "Thanks." Nova stepped forward, one hand clutching the hem of her mother's shirt. "Why do you give us gifts?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. The truth, clean, unfiltered, like her mother. "I'm trying to," I said, looking straight at her. She didn't answer, just took the bag and turned around. "Come in," Ariel said. Her voice carried no warmth, but no malice either. Inside, the house was small, clean but worn, the kind of space that knew struggle but refused to break. There were crayon drawings taped to the fridge, a cracked clock above the kitchen sink, the smell of cinnamon and lemon cleaner hung in the air. "Have a seat," Ariel said, motioning to the couch. The kids plopped down on the rug with their new toys. I sat, awkward, like a guest in a life I was never meant to leave. Noah talked non-stop about school, dinosaurs, his science fair project. I hung on to every word like they were gospel. Noah stayed quiet, building a Lego tower, glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. At one point, Noah looked at his wrist, and then at mine. "Hey," he said, "you got that mark too?" Nova looked up. "It's a birthmark," she said slowly. "We both have it." Ariel turned her head slowly, listening. I swallowed. "Yeah," I said, "it runs in my family. My grandfather had it. My dad. Me." The room got very quiet. Noah turned to his mom. "Does that mean he's—" Ariel stood. "Time for dinner," she said, cutting the question like a blade. "Malcolm, you should go." I stood too. I wasn't going to push it. But as I reached for the door, a small voice behind me said, "Thanks for the Legos." I turned. Noah smiled. Nova gave a small nod. I walked out into the dusk, heart hammering harder than any boardroom showdown I'd ever faced. I kept coming back. Every Friday evening I brought something: snacks, books, a chess set. I never forced it, just showed up, sat, listened, and little by little, they opened. Noah started showing me his drawings. Nova challenged me to chess. One day she actually beat me. She didn't smile, but I saw it. The tiny flicker of pride in her eyes. Ariel stayed guarded. We rarely spoke more than 10 words at a time, but she let me in, just enough. One night we sat outside on her front steps after the kids had gone to bed. The street was quiet. My driver waited down the block. "You could have been a doctor," I said, staring at the dim glow of her porch light. "You were brilliant. You still are." She didn't look at me. "I still can," she said. My heart twisted. "Then let me help," I said. "I can pay for night classes, tutoring, whatever it takes." She turned. Finally. Her voice was calm, but sharp. "You think a check can buy back the years you missed? The nights I cried on that couch because Noah had a fever and I couldn't afford Tylenol? No," I said, "but it can buy you a second chance." Her eyes held mine. "You don't get to give me that." I earned my second chance. With every hour I scrubbed floors, with every meal I skipped so my kids could eat. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'm not trying to save you, Ariel," I said. "I'm just trying not to fail again." We sat in silence. Then, softly, she said, "You can keep coming for them, not for me." That night, I looked up at the stars and wondered if redemption had a language. Because I'd speak it every day, for as long as it takes, even if my name never gets written in their bedtime prayers. Maybe one day, it won't be a curse either. Some mistakes are accidents, others are choices disguised as love. The day I took my children without permission, I told myself I was doing it for them, that they deserved more than a cramped apartment, a school with broken lockers, and a mother who never stopped sacrificing. I told myself I wasn't stealing. I was showing them what life could be. But deep down, I knew. I knew it was wrong the moment I crossed the line. It was a Thursday. I'd arrived earlier than usual, wearing sneakers instead of dress shoes, hoping the shift in appearance would make me feel less like the man who'd already caused so much damage. Ariel wasn't home. Her neighbor, an older woman with a smile like gossip, waved me over. "She'd just left for work," she said. "Said she'd be back after her shift. The kids are inside." I thanked her and walked up the steps. Noah opened the door, grinning. "Uncle Malcolm." Nova followed, holding a workbook in one hand, skeptical but not hostile. "Want to hang out?" I asked. "Maybe go pick out some school stuff? Ice cream, too." Noah's eyes lit up. Nova hesitated. "Mom didn't say anything." "She knows I was coming," I lied. "And I promise, we won't be gone long." That was my second mistake. The first was not calling their mother. By noon, we were driving down the highway in my SUV, windows cracked, music playing low. We laughed. We argued about the best superhero. We stopped for burgers and chocolate milk. For a few hours, I wasn't Malcolm Rivera, the absentee father, or billionaire CEO. I was just Dad. Or close to it. Nova sat beside me, half watching, half guarded. And God hate. Noah kept asking questions. "Do you have a pool?" "Yes." "Do you have a movie theater?" "Yes." "Can we see it?" That was the moment the idea planted itself. Small, harmless, a quick visit, a tiny detour. "I don't see why not," I said, smiling. My villa was 30 minutes outside the city, nestled between pine trees and silence. Gates opened at the tap of a button. Security cameras tracked us but didn't blink. The kids ran inside like they'd been let loose in a dream. Nova marveled at the library. Noah jumped on every bed. They swam, ate candy, played games, took pictures on my old Polaroid, and I watched, quietly, as if capturing moments I'd never been given before. Then the sun dipped behind the trees, and my phone buzzed. 12 missed calls, 6 voicemails, all from Ariel. My stomach dropped. Noah noticed first. "Why's your phone blowing up?" I didn't answer. Then the doorbell rang. I rushed to the monitor. It was no one. Just silence. And then I opened a voicemail. Her voice, shaking, terrified, rage wrapped in panic. "Where are my kids, Malcolm? You took them without a word. You said you wanted to visit, not vanish. If anything happens to them, I swear to God." The rest was drowned out by static and breathless sobs. I sat down on the marble floor, every illusion of control collapsing. I hadn't just crossed the line of it. I'd shattered it. By 8:00 p.m., I tried calling her back. No answer. I texted, "They're safe. I'll bring them back first thing in the morning." Still nothing. I looked at Noah and Nova, curled up on the couch, sleepy-eyed and content. They didn't know their mother hadn't given permission. They didn't know the police would be looking for me within hours. At 10:00 p.m., I turned on the news. There it was, Ariel's face. A headline, "Single mother posts viral plea after children taken by billionaire father." Over 200,000 shares in 3 hours. The post she wrote hit harder than any courtroom verdict. "He left me at 18, never looked back. I raised Noah and Nova on tears and bread crusts. Now he returns, with cameras, gifts, and charm. And he's vanished again, this time with my children. And at the end, if anything happens to my babies, this country will never hear the end of me." They found me at dawn. Unmarked cars, quiet knock, calm voices, because I was Malcolm Rivera and not a street thug. I stepped outside, hands visible. No drama. Inside, Nova gripped her brother's hand. "Is Mom mad?" I knelt. For the first time in my life, I didn't know what to say to a child. "She just wants you home," I whispered. Noah hugged me tight. Noah didn't. I watched them disappear into the back seat of a squad car. Ariel's voice echoed across the wind. "Don't you ever come near them again." I didn't answer. Because what could I say? What apology redeems a second disappearance? What father kidnaps his own redemption? That night, in a concrete holding cell that smelled of bleach and regret, I sat alone. No phone, no suits, no titles, just me, just silence. And the realization that love isn't earned by money or toys or memories borrowed from fairy tales. It's earned by showing up and never disappearing again. The courtroom was freezing, not cold like winter air, cold like judgment, like the kind of place where your money can't buy warmth, where your name doesn't echo power, only consequences. I sat in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than the monthly rent of everyone in that room combined, and for the first time in my life, I felt naked in it. Across from me, Arielle Brooks walked in, shoulders squared, chin lifted, wearing a simple cream blouse and a long black skirt. Her hair was pulled back. Her eyes didn't waver, and her children weren't with her. They were at home, safe, far from me. I lowered my gaze. My lawyer whispered, "We can try mediation." "No," I said, "let her speak." The bailiff called the judge. A woman in her late 60s took the bench, silver hair, voice like thunder bottled in glass. Her robe didn't sway. Her eyes didn't blink. She looked at me the way a storm looks at a weak roof. "This hearing will address the allegations of parental abduction, violation of custodial agreements, and unlawful detainment of minors." My throat dried. Arielle sat still, her hands folded in her lap, but I could see the slight tremble in her fingers. The judge looked directly at me. "Mr. Malcolm Rivera, how do you plead?" I stood. "Guilty of making the worst mistake of my life," I said, my voice steady but thick. "But I never intended harm." The courtroom stayed silent. I sat down. Then Arielle stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. But every word she spoke hit like a hammer to the ribs. I was 18 when he left, pregnant, alone. I gave birth in a county hospital with no epidural and no one holding my hand. I named them by myself. I raised them by myself. Every fever, every scraped knee, every night of homework. Alone. The judge leaned forward, and then he returned, with charm and suits and promises, and I let him in. A little. For them. I thought maybe, just maybe, he was ready to be their father. She paused, swallowed, but instead he took them. Without asking, without telling. For hours I thought they were dead. My lungs constricted. I don't care how many skyscrapers he's built. He tore down a mother's peace in one afternoon. She sat down. Silence stretched until it was a scream. The judge opened a file, cleared her throat. This court acknowledges the emotional distress suffered by the plaintiff, by the unlawful removal of minors, the breach of custodial terms. She looked at me. You may be their biological father, Mr. Rivera, but fatherhood is not an inheritance. It's a responsibility, and in that, you have failed. I swallowed hard. She continued. Full legal custody is hereby granted to Ms. Ariel Brooks. Mr. Rivera will have supervised visitation rights only under the discretion of the court. Furthermore, he is ordered to pay monthly child support based on income, and she looked directly into my soul. $500,000, 0 cents in damages for emotional distress, unlawful detainment, and violation of custodial rights. Gasps filled the room. A reporter's pen scratched faster. My attorney leaned in. We can appeal? No, I said again. The gavel struck once. The court is adjourned. Outside, the sun mocked me with its warmth. News cameras whirred. Microphones reached for Ariel. She stood calmly, holding a small envelope, probably paperwork. She didn't look for me, but I looked for her. I walked over, slowly, palms open, my voice lower than a whisper. Ellie, please, just 2 minutes. She turned, tired, not angry, just done. You had 10 years, she said. I know. I can't take them back. She stared at me. I'll pay what I owe. I'll follow the court's order, but I still want to be part of their lives. Whatever part you allow. A long silence. Then she bent down, whispered something to her kids, who had arrived with her mother during the media swarm. Noah turned and waved. Bye, Uncle Malcolm, he said. Nova didn't wave, but she didn't look away either. That was something. I stood still as they walked away, their hands in hers, like 3 stars in a constellation I no longer belonged to. That night I returned to my penthouse, took off the suit, sat alone in the dark, surrounded by polished floors, imported art, and the echo of everything I never said when it mattered. I opened the drawer of my desk, pulled out a box of old letters I'd written but never sent, one for each birthday, one for every Christmas, and one marked for when they forgive me. I ran my hand over that envelope, knowing full well I might never get the chance to deliver it. But still, every Friday, I'd show up. Even if they ignored me, even if Ariel closed the door, because love is not a courtroom victory. It's not shared DNA or a name on a certificate. It's showing up. And this time, I wouldn't disappear again. You ever stand outside a window on a rainy night and watch the light inside flicker across people's faces? Warmth on the other side, silence on yours. You were close enough to see it, but not invited in. That's who I became, the man outside the picture frame. It had been 6 months since the court hearing. 6 months of supervised visits every other Sunday, each one stiff and short and supervised by a counselor who scribbled notes, while I tried to remember how to talk to 10-year-olds who only knew me as the man who vanished. Twice. I showed up every time. Never late, never unshaven, always holding something. Books, chessboards, That Star Wars replica Noah said he liked. Nova would smile sometimes. Nova rarely did, but I saw it in her eyes. She was watching, measuring, waiting for me to fail again. I never blamed her. I blamed me. Outside of those 2 hours every other week, I became a ghost who paid tuition, funded field trips, and mailed letters to kids who didn't always write back. I didn't stop. Every month I wrote them a new letter, one for each of them, typed, signed, sealed with a photo. A childhood memory I hoped we'd someday create. The first photo of the aquarium we never went to. The second, a chess tournament Nova might enjoy. The third was harder. It was a photo of me, sitting in the bleachers at Noah's school science fair. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. Ariel didn't see me. Neither did Noah. I watched him win second place for his homemade volcano. The smile on his face when he held up that ribbon. I stood and clapped quietly behind everyone else, then left before anyone noticed. That photo stayed sealed in a manila envelope. I never sent it. 2 months later, Nova ran track at a citywide event. I showed up early, sat high in the bleachers with a baseball cap pulled low. She was fast, fluid, like her body understood freedom even if her heart didn't. When she crossed the finish line, first place, she lifted her hands just slightly, not a full celebration, just a flicker of pride. And then she glanced into the crowd. Our eyes met, just for a second. She didn't smile, she didn't wave, but she didn't look away either. That moment meant more than any courtroom ruling. The hardest part wasn't the silence from my children. When I put my palms on the table, the sheriff's corpse started to spin. The hardest part wasn't the silence from my children. It was watching someone else walk into the space I used to dream about. His name was Elijah Monroe, Dr. Pediatric Cardiologist, widower. The kind of man you want near your kids when you're not there. The kind of man who held doors open, remembered birthdays, someone to take and called Nova Champ after her meets. I saw him once at the grocery store with Ariel and the twins. They looked like a family. She was smiling. Noah was pushing the cart. Nova was laughing. Elijah had his hand gently on Ariel's back. I stood in the next aisle, behind a tower of cereal boxes, watching. Not out of jealousy, but grief. Grief for the life I destroyed. Grief for the role I could have filled. Grief for the fact that he earned their trust the right way. And yet, that night, I still mailed them their letters, one for Nova, one for Noah, and one for Ariel. She never opened them, but I still wrote. On their 11th birthday, I sent them each a watch, simple, classic, one black leather, one brown, on the inside, engraved in tiny silver script, "Your time matters, always." They didn't call. But a week later, Noah wore his during a supervised visit. He didn't mention it, but he wore it. Then came the day that nearly broke me. I was watching the evening news, mind on autopilot, when the headline slid across the screen. Local mother of twins graduates medical school with honors. There she was, Ariel Brooks, dressed in a white coat, eyes shining, the twins standing proudly at her side, holding her degree like it belonged to them too. They did a short interview. Noah spoke confidently. Nova stood tall. Ariel said, "I didn't do this alone. My children pushed me every day. I wanted to show them it's never too late to rewrite your story." I watched, alone, not invited, not mentioned, not erased, but not remembered either. And I accepted that. You see, some men fight for what they want with fists, some with lawsuits, some with money. Me, I fight with presence. I fight by showing up, because even if they never call me Dad, even if I'm never in the family photos on the wall. If they look over their shoulder during life's biggest moments and they catch me in the crowd, clapping from afar, maybe, just maybe, they'll know. I never stopped trying. Atlanta looked different from up here. The sun was setting behind the skyline, low and golden, casting long shadows across the city I once thought I owned. But tonight from this hospital rooftop, I didn't feel like a man above the world. I felt like a man looking in from the outside. Again. It was Ariel's day. She was being honored by the city. Dr. Ariel Brooks, founder of the Hope and Heal Initiative, a national network of free clinics for single mothers and their children. 5 years since she earned her medical degree. 2 since she opened her first center. 10 since I lost the right to call her mine. And now, she was standing in front of hundreds, politicians, physicians, students, giving a speech with Noah and Nova beside her. I wasn't there, not in the audience, not in the photos, not on the guest list, but I watched from a rooftop across the street where a private videographer I'd hired streamed the event to my phone. I didn't want attention, I just needed to witness it. Ariel stepped up to the podium. Her coat was pure white trimmed in gold, her voice steady and soft. I stand before you today, not because I've done it alone, she said, but because I chose to rise, because I refused to believe that my pain was the end of my story, because 2 children, born into chaos, gave me a reason to breathe when breathing felt impossible. My eyes burned. Noah, tall, broad-shouldered, now a college engineering major, nodded proudly. Nova, stoic, sharp-armed, training to become a civil rights attorney, stood with arms crossed like a general. They weren't kids anymore. They were legacy. Later that night, I was still on that rooftop, alone, lost in memory, when I heard footsteps. I turned. Noah stood there, hands in his coat pockets, a little taller than the last time I saw him. Behind him, Nova leaned against the wall, arms still crossed. My heart stopped. "How did you find me?" I asked, stunned. "We figured," Nova shrugged. "You never really stopped watching." Nova stepped forward. "You think we didn't see you at every track meet, science fair, college tour?" Swallowed hard. I didn't want to intrude. "You didn't," she said. "You stayed outside the picture." A beat. Then Nova reached into her bag and pulled out a small black box. "Open it." I hesitated. Inside was a gold chain. Simple, elegant, with 2 delicate pendants shaped like wings. One had Nova engraved on it, the other, Noah. "For you," Noah said. "So you stop pretending we don't know." My throat clenched. "So you stop pretending we don't know." My throat clenched. "I don't deserve this," I whispered. Nova looked at me. Finally. Fully. "Maybe not, but you earned it anyway." Slowly. Silently. They both stepped beside me, gazing out over the city. "You know," Noah said, "there were nights I hated you, and mornings I hoped you'd come back. Eventually, both feelings canceled each other out." I nodded, unable to speak. Nova's voice was softer now. "We never called you Dad, but we never called anyone else that either." A silence hung in the air, heavy, beautiful. Then Nova chuckled. "Mom doesn't know we're up here, by the way. She'd kill us." I laughed through my tears. "She'll be fine," Nova smirked. "She always is." We stayed there for a while. No grand confessions, no speeches, just a rooftop, a necklace, a city below, and peace. I hadn't felt in a decade. When it was time to leave, Nova turned and said, "You carried guilt all these years. Now let us carry you a little." And they did. Not physically, but with presence, with forgiveness, with something I thought I'd lost forever. Recognition. I don't show up in headlines anymore. My company runs itself. I've stepped out of the spotlight, but every few weeks, I get a letter from Nova, from Noah, sometimes from both, updates, thoughts, photos, and every year on Father's Day, a single envelope arrives. Never early, never late. Inside, a handwritten card that simply says, "Thanks for never disappearing again." And you see, redemption doesn't look like applause. It looks like a quiet rooftop, a whisper of your name from the lips of the people you once failed, and the feeling of wings around your neck, reminding you that even broken fathers can rise again. I was never in the picture, but now they carry me with them, and that's more than I ever dared to hope for.